Damascus, Syria, October 2016. 8:34 p.m. A conference room in a building controlled by Iranian intelligence. She sits across from Mohammad Javad Larijani, senior advisor to Iran's Supreme Leader. He's talking about Israel, about Hezbollah, about weapons shipments moving through Syria into Lebanon, and she's taking notes like any good journalist would. She nods at the right moments, asks follow-up questions that sound intelligent but not suspicious, and keeps her expression neutral even when he mentions target lists and operational timelines. She's wearing a black chador that covers everything except her face, speaking fluent Farsi with a slight Lebanese accent that she practiced for 18 months, playing the role of Zineb al-Saffar, a French-Lebanese Shia journalist researching Iranian influence in the Middle East. Larijani doesn't know he's sitting across from a Jewish woman. He doesn't know that her real name is Catherine Perez-Shakdam, and her mission is to penetrate the Iranian regime's inner circle and extract intelligence that could expose their entire regional network. He doesn't know that the research project she's pitching is a complete fabrication designed to get her access to people exactly like him. And he definitely doesn't know that in less than 2 years, the information from this exact conversation will contribute to one of the largest intelligence breaches in Iranian history. This meeting took 3 years to arrange. It will last 47 minutes, and every word he says is being memorized for Israeli and Western intelligence agencies. But how did a Jewish woman from Paris end up here, trusted completely by one of Iran's most powerful officials? The answer is a disguise so perfect, it fooled Iranian security for 3 years. Catherine Perez-Shakdam was born in Paris to a Jewish family, her father Yemenite and her mother French, giving her Middle Eastern features that could blend into Arab societies. She worked as a journalist in London covering Middle Eastern affairs, but around 2013, she made a decision that would change everything. She built a second identity, not just a fake passport, but a complete persona that could withstand Iranian intelligence background checks. The identity was Zineb al-Saffar, a French-Lebanese Shia Muslim with deep religious convictions and academic interest in Iranian regional influence. She spent 18 months constructing this identity, learning Farsi and Shia religious practices, adopting the chador, attending mosques in London, building a digital footprint with social media accounts, and published articles under the name Zineb al-Saffar. Every detail was calculated to create a backstory that would check out if Iranian intelligence ran her name through their databases. By January 2015, the identity was ready for its first test. London, the Iranian embassy. Catherine walked into the consular section with her French passport carrying the name Zineb al-Saffar and requested a visa to visit Tehran for research on Shia communities. The consular officer reviewed her application, asked standard questions, checked security databases. She answered in fluent Farsi, which reduced suspicion immediately. After 20 minutes, he stamped her passport. Visa approved. That stamp represented months of preparation and the first breach of what would become a 3-year intelligence operation. The disguise had 3 critical components that made it undetectable. First, physical appearance. Her Yemenite heritage gave her features that fit naturally into Middle Eastern settings, and the chador completed the transformation. Second, cultural fluency. She didn't just speak Farsi, she spoke it with regional variations, knew Shia terminology, could quote the Quran, and understood social customs that governed interactions in conservative Islamic settings. Third, believable motivation. Her cover as a journalist researching Shia communities gave her legitimate reasons to seek interviews with Iranian officials and ask about Iran regional influence without raising suspicion. The combination created a disguise that passed every Iranian security test. Background checks found a consistent trail for Zineb al-Saffar. In-person interactions reinforced the identity through perfect language and cultural behavior, and her stated motivations aligned with what Iranian officials wanted to hear. A Western journalist interested in Iran's positive influence. But the disguise was only the foundation. The next challenge was using it to build trust with the people who controlled access to Iran's most sensitive secrets. Getting into Iran was one thing. Getting into the inner circles of the Revolutionary Guards was something else entirely. Catherine understood a fundamental intelligence principle. Access follows trust, and trust is built through personal relationships over time. She employed a classic technique called building cover for action, where you establish credibility in low-risk environments first, then use that credibility to gain access to higher-value targets. She started with Shia communities in London, attending mosques and meeting expatriate Iranians and Lebanese Shia Muslims with connections back home. She presented herself as Zineb al-Saffar, researching Shia theology and community networks. These initial contacts were low-level, but they provided something crucial: references. When she later requested interviews with Iranian officials, she could mention connections to community leaders in London or Beirut, making her seem legitimate rather than suspicious. Between 2014 and early 2015, she built a network across Shia communities in Europe and the Middle East. She published articles under the name Zineb al-Saffar in minor Middle Eastern publications, establishing a public record as a journalist covering Shia issues. By mid-2015, when she made her first trip to Iran, she wasn't arriving unknown. She had references, published work, and a backstory that could be verified. The first trip in summer 2015 was for reconnaissance and relationship building. She visited religious sites in Tehran, Qom, and Mossad, conducting interviews with clerics and community organizers about Shia theology and Iran's role in the Muslim world. During this trip, she contacted officials from Iran's Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance, the body managing foreign journalists. She requested permissions for future visits and expressed interest in deeper research on Iran's regional influence. Ministry officials saw her as an opportunity. A Western journalist sympathetic to Iran's narrative who could publish favorable coverage in European media. This misperception was exactly what she wanted. Over 18 months, she made multiple trips to Iran, each time requesting interviews with slightly more senior officials. The pattern was consistent. Use access to lower-level officials to request introductions to higher ones, framing requests as part of ongoing research. Each successful interview became a reference for the next. I spoke with Deputy Minister X last month, and he suggested I contact you. This approach leveraged the natural human tendency to trust people vouched for by someone you know. By late 2016, she had worked her way up to meetings with senior Revolutionary Guards and intelligence figures. The breakthrough came through a contact in Syria, where Iran was deeply involved supporting Assad's regime. This contact introduced her to Iranian officials operating in Damascus, who oversaw weapons shipments to Hezbollah. These officials, in turn, provided introductions to higher-ranking figures in Tehran. The key to building trust at this level was demonstrating that she understood and respected their worldview. She never challenged their narrative about Israel or Iran's right to support resistance movements. Instead, she asked questions that allowed them to explain their perspective in detail, using a technique called elicitation that gets targets to reveal information by making them feel they're educating someone who wants to understand. Iranian officials talked openly because they believed she was sympathetic and could help communicate their message to Western audiences. They didn't realize every conversation was being analyzed for intelligence value. By early 2017, Catherine had regular access to officials connected to Iran's nuclear program, its support for proxy forces, and the Revolutionary Guard's command structure. She attended meetings in government buildings, visited restricted sites, and conducted interviews revealing operational details about Iran's regional strategy. The trust was so complete that Iranian officials stopped treating her like an outsider and started treating her like an ally. But access alone wasn't enough. The real test was using that access to collect actionable intelligence and transmit it without getting caught. April 2016, Tehran. Catherine's fourth trip to Iran, and the first time she was granted access to Revolutionary Guard facilities. The invitation came through an IRGC media relations officer who believed she was working on a documentary about Iran's role fighting terrorism in Iraq and Syria. The cover story was perfect. Iran wanted positive coverage of its involvement against ISIS, and a Western journalist offering that story was exactly what they wanted. The officer arranged for her to visit an IRGC training facility outside Tehran, where volunteers prepared for deployment to Syria. This was a restricted military site requiring security clearance. At the gate, security guards checked her passport and credentials against a pre-approved visitor list. They made phone calls to confirm authorization. This was always the most dangerous moment, where a single red flag could unravel everything. But her name checked out, and she was waved through. Inside, IRGC personnel gave her a tour explaining training programs and operational deployments in Iraq and Syria. She took notes, filmed footage for her supposed documentary, and asked questions that sounded journalistic but extracted specific intelligence. How many fighters trained here monthly? What equipment were they receiving? Which Syrian locations were they deployed to? The answers provided valuable intelligence about Iran's military involvement in Syria, command structures, and logistical networks. But the real breakthrough came during a conversation with one of the officers. He mentioned she should speak with a particular official in Damascus who coordinated weapons shipments and strategic planning for Iranian forces and Hezbollah. He gave her a name and contact information. This was exactly the high-value contact she'd been working toward, a senior IRGC officer with direct knowledge of weapons transfers and military coordination with Hezbollah. 2 months later, she was in Damascus. The meeting in October 2016 that opened this story was the culmination of 18 months of intelligence work. She didn't randomly end up in a room with Mohammad Javad Larijani. She was introduced through a chain of contacts she'd carefully built, starting with London clerics and working up to senior Iranian officials in Syria. The intelligence she collected from these meetings included details about Iran's nuclear program, missile development, Revolutionary Guard structure, and networks supporting Hezbollah and proxy forces. But accessing these officials was only half the challenge. The other half was getting information out without detection. Iranian counterintelligence monitors communications, tracks foreign nationals, and conducts surveillance on anyone with access to sensitive facilities. Catherine knew that transmitting intelligence electronically inside Iran risked detection, so she used a different approach. She memorized key details rather than writing them down, carried no recording devices, and documented nothing while inside restricted facilities. The intelligence she collected was transmitted to Western agencies only after she returned to London, or when she was in third countries where Iranian surveillance was less intense. Sources suggest she used encrypted communications, dead drops, and in-person meetings in secure locations. Reports indicate Mossad and Western agencies provided logistical support, including secure channels and operational guidance. Though Catherine denies working directly for Mossad, describing her activities as independent journalism, that produced intelligence value. Whether formally recruited or an informal asset, the outcome was the same. Intelligence from inside Iran flowed to Israel and its allies. The entry point she created was unprecedented for a Western operative. She had face-to-face access to decision-makers, observed restricted facilities firsthand, and collected information nearly impossible to obtain through technical intelligence alone. But the deeper she penetrated, the greater the risk of exposure became. Between 2015 and 2017, Catherine collected intelligence across 4 critical areas. First, Iran's nuclear program. Despite the 2015 nuclear deal, Israeli intelligence suspected Iran maintained covert research programs. Catherine's access gave insight into this hidden dimension. Research facilities not declared under the agreement, work on advanced centrifuges, and weapons-related technologies under civilian research cover, names of scientists involved, and organizational structures coordinating the covert work. This intelligence contributed to Israeli claims that Iran violated the deal's spirit. In 2018, Mossad stole Iran's nuclear archive from a Tehran warehouse. 55,000 pages and 183 CDs documenting past nuclear weapons research. Intelligence analysts believe Catherine's reporting helped identify the archive's location and provided context that made the stolen documents more valuable. Second, Iran's support for Hezbollah. Catherine's meetings in Damascus and Beirut gave direct access to information about weapons shipments, training programs, and command structures linking Revolutionary Guards to Hezbollah. She documented smuggling routes, transferring weapons from Iran through Syria to Lebanon. Specific weapon types including precision-guided missiles threatening Israeli cities, and key Quds force figures coordinating with Hezbollah commanders. This intelligence was critical for Israeli targeting decisions. Between 2017 and 2020, Israel conducted hundreds of airstrikes in Syria, disrupting Iranian weapons shipments, guided by intelligence from sources like Catherine. Third, Revolutionary Guard's command structure. Catherine's interviews and facility observations provided detailed organizational information. Commanders responsible for different areas, rivalries and power dynamics within the Guards, and coordination between IRGC and other agencies and foreign proxies. This organizational intelligence is invaluable for targeting operations, identifying the most valuable targets for assassination, recruitment, or covert operations. Fourth, Iran's missile development programs. Catherine collected information about missile testing sites, research facilities working on guidance and propulsion, and supply chains providing missile production components. She learned about efforts to improve missile accuracy, extend range, and develop countermeasures against missile defense systems. The methods she used to transmit intelligence were designed to avoid detection. She didn't carry physical documents out of Iran, which security checks would discover. She memorized details and transcribed them only after leaving the country. For sensitive information, she used encrypted digital channels provided by intelligence handlers. She traveled to third countries like Turkey or Gulf states, where she could communicate more securely, sending encrypted messages through platforms using multiple encryption layers and routing through servers in different countries. In some cases, she met handlers in person for verbal debriefings in secure European locations. The intelligence wasn't always immediately actionable, but collectively over 3 years, it contributed to a deeper understanding of Iran's nuclear program, regional strategy, and organizational vulnerabilities. Israeli and Western agencies used this information for targeting decisions in military strikes and covert operations, provided evidence for diplomatic pressure and sanctions, and built the case for political isolation of Iran was substantial. But the longer the operation continued, the greater the risk of exposure. Tehran, March 2017, 11:47 a.m. Catherine stood at a security checkpoint inside an Iranian government building. The guard was taking longer than usual, making phone calls, checking databases, conferring with a supervisor. Something was wrong. She maintained composure, standing calmly in her chador, holding credentials and authorization. But inside, her mind raced through contingency plans. If they discovered her real identity, there was no escape. After 5 minutes that felt like eternity, the supervisor waved her through. False alarm. A bureaucratic issue with paperwork, not suspicion about identity. But the incident reminded her how thin the margin of safety was. This wasn't the only close call. There were multiple moments when small mistakes nearly exposed her. An Iranian official asked about a detail from her cover story she'd slightly misremembered. She'd claimed to study at a particular French university, but when pressed for details about professors and courses, she realized she'd confused elements from 2 different universities. She recovered by laughing and blaming her memory, saying she'd attended so many conferences that details sometimes blurred. The official accepted this, but the moment was a stark reminder that even small inconsistencies could trigger suspicion. Another dangerous moment came when an Iranian official who'd lived in Paris began speaking French, asking about neighborhoods and landmarks. This was a test to see if her claimed French background was authentic. Fortunately, Catherine actually was from Paris, so she passed easily. But if her cover had claimed a background she didn't have, this casual conversation could have exposed her. The psychological strain of maintaining deception 24/7 was immense. She couldn't let her guard down for a moment. Every conversation had to be consistent with Zineb al-Saffar's identity. She had to remember not just big lies, but all small details. Where Zineb grew up, what schools she attended, what her parents did, her favorite foods, religious practices. Any slip could reveal inconsistencies that would raise questions. By early 2017, after nearly 3 years, Catherine decided it was time to end the mission. Several factors drove this decision. First, operational risk was increasing. The longer she maintained deception, the more opportunities for someone to notice inconsistencies or for Iranian counterintelligence to identify her as a threat. Second, she'd already collected substantial intelligence, and the marginal value of continuing was decreasing relative to the increasing risk. Third, the psychological burden had become unsustainable. Living a lie for 3 years, constantly afraid of exposure, unable to have genuine relationships, had worn her down. But how do you exit an operation like this? She couldn't just disappear without raising suspicion. The solution was radical: public self-exposure. In April 2017, she published an article in the Tower magazine revealing her real identity and describing her infiltration of the Iranian regime. The article explained her real name, Jewish background, and the fake Muslim identity she'd created. Within hours, her story was top headline on intelligence and Middle Eastern news sites worldwide. Iranian state media reacted, denying she'd ever been in Iran and accusing her of fabrication. Hezbollah-affiliated outlets called for her assassination, labeling her a Zionist spy. Her life as she knew it was over. She went into hiding, moving frequently, living under protection, knowing she was now a high-priority target for Iranian intelligence and Hezbollah. But the public revelation accomplished strategic objectives. It made it impossible for Iran to quietly arrest or kill her, exposed vulnerabilities in Iranian security, and sent a message that Israel could reach into the heart of the regime. The operation was over. Now came the reckoning of what it accomplished. April 2017 to present. Catherine Perez-Shakdam lives in hiding. Her exact location known only to security personnel and intelligence contacts. She cannot return to her previous life, cannot travel freely or appear in public without extensive security. Iranian intelligence and Hezbollah have placed her on target lists. This is the price she paid for exposing herself. But the intelligence she collected had consequences extending far beyond her personal fate. In April 2018, exactly 1 year after Catherine revealed her operation, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unveiled Iran's nuclear archive. Mossad had stolen 55,000 pages of documents and 183 CDs from a Tehran warehouse containing detailed records of Iran's nuclear weapons research program, codenamed Project Ahmad. The documents proved Iran had lied about its nuclear program, scope, and preserved infrastructure to restart weapons development. Intelligence analysts believe Catherine's reporting helped identify the archive's location. Her intelligence about covert research facilities, organizational structure, and program connections provided context that made the discovery possible. The archive became central to Trump's decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal in May 2018, citing the documents as evidence Iran couldn't be trusted. Her intelligence also contributed to Israeli military operations targeting Iranian positions in Syria. Between 2017 and 2020, Israel conducted hundreds of airstrikes against Iranian weapons depots, command centers, and logistics networks. Targeting information for many strikes came from intelligence Catherine and other sources collected, significantly degrading Iran's ability to transfer advanced weapons to Hezbollah. The psychological impact on Iranian leadership was substantial. The revelation that a Western journalist had spent 3 years inside their inner circles collecting intelligence without detection was massive embarrassment, demonstrating fundamental counterintelligence failure. After Catherine's revelation, Iran tightened security protocols for foreign journalists and researchers, becoming more cautious about granting access and increasing surveillance. This made future intelligence operations more difficult, but also imposed costs on Iran, hindering their ability to engage with legitimate journalists and academics. For Catherine personally, the aftermath has been defined by exile and isolation. She cannot return to France or Britain without significant security risks. She lives under assumed names, changes locations frequently, and maintains minimal contact with family and friends. In interviews after her revelation, Catherine described the operation as both the most meaningful and most destructive experience of her life. She believes the intelligence helped prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and saved lives by disrupting weapons shipments to Hezbollah. But she acknowledges the personal cost, loss of her former life, permanent fear of assassination, and knowledge she can never be truly free again. Catherine's story is now studied in intelligence training programs as an example of successful long-term penetration of a hostile regime, demonstrating that human intelligence remains valuable even with sophisticated technical surveillance. The operation showed that personal relationships and face-to-face conversations can provide insights impossible to obtain through satellite imagery or signals intelligence. Today, Catherine lives in the shadows, protected but isolated, aware that Iranian intelligence and Hezbollah have not forgotten. Her story reminds us that intelligence work demands sacrifices most people cannot imagine and would not choose. She chose it anyway, believing that preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and disrupting its support for terrorism justified the cost. The intelligence she collected delayed Iran's nuclear program, exposed its regional networks, and contributed to operations that degraded its capabilities. Those outcomes came at the price of her identity, her safety, and her freedom. She can never return to a normal life. But for 3 years, she was inside the heart of the Iranian regime, trusted by its most senior officials, collecting intelligence that changed the balance of power in the Middle East. That's the legacy of Catherine Perez-Shakdam, the Jewish spy who tricked the Ayatollah.